No one likes to think about getting older, but it's one of the only certain things in life that is going to happen to all of us. So in today's video, I want to run through pensions, what they are, and exactly how I maximise mine to ensure that I'm going to have a good retirement. Before we start, I just want to take the time to thank each and every one of you for watching my first and second video. It's quite daunting putting yourself out there on YouTube, and I'm really glad that a lot of you liked it. A special shout out to Owls Eagles, who was the first person to ever comment on one of my videos. I know this is a very small milestone, but genuinely, the joy that it gave me to see someone comment was quite ridiculous, really, given what it was. So a special thank you to you. Also, to all the people that reached out on my Facebook page, thank you very much. To all the people that shared my link, to all the people that liked the post. It really did mean a lot, and it did give me a lot of confidence to keep going with these videos. So thank you to all of you. Anyway, that being said, back into pensions. Let's go. So to start, it's worth mentioning this is not going to be the most detailed breakdown of exactly what a pension is. I'm going to give a brief overview of the two main types, and then after that I'm going to go through exactly how I maximise my own personal pension in an aim to show you how you could potentially do the same with yours. We could probably talk about pensions for hours, but I know for a fact a lot of you will probably turn off and fall asleep at that point. And for the purposes of this video, I don't feel like going into every specific nuance of pensions is going to be that valuable. I just want to give you an introduction into what pensions are if you do not know what they are, and hopefully show you why it's really important to make sure that you are paying regularly into these over the course of your working life. A pension is something that you will pay into a pot of money effectively, and you can either do this through your employer or as a private pension. This money is then invested into either stocks and shares, bonds, or other items on the market, with the view that this grows either in line or ideally higher than inflation, so that at the time you come to retire, you have a nice pot of money that you can either draw down on, buy an annuity with, or do some sort of hybrid of one of those two. I am aware there are lots of other different nuanced approaches to drawing down on your pension, but for the purposes of this video, I want to keep it super simple just to give everyone an introduction into pensions. Pension 1, defined benefit pension. Arguably the better of the two, and probably the reason why they don't really exist anymore. But I will cover what they are very briefly, just for those of you that are not aware. The defined benefit pension is something that you would enter to usually through an employment contract, and this is effectively where your employer would promise you a set amount of money upon retirement. That employer would be liable for that pension, and that's probably why they don't exist anymore. These would come in two forms, usually either as a final salary or a career average. And effectively what this means is, upon the point of retirement, the company would look back over your years of service and what salary you were on, and they would promise you a set amount each month until the day that you die. The reason these are very rare, almost to the point that they don't exist now, is because most companies offered more than they actually could fulfill to their pensioners. They also found that pensioners were living longer, and people tended, when they were on these pensions, to possibly retire earlier, meaning that they would have to pay out for a longer period of time. For those of you that have these sort of pensions, hold on to them. They are so good. I am jealous. Usually what's happened now is that these pensions have been ended and people have been entered into defined contribution schemes. And for those of you that have entered the workplace in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, you'll find you probably have been entered on a defined contribution scheme to begin with. So for the purpose of this video, that's as much as I'm going to say on defined benefit schemes. If you do want to read up more, I'll attach a link. This isn't an affiliated link or anything like that. but I'll attach a link to some useful information that just describes exactly what a defined benefit scheme is. Pension Scheme 2, the Defined Contribution Scheme. These can also be known as workplace pensions, or in the case of a sole trader, or if you're operating for a limited company on your own, you may set up a private pension and it will usually take the form of a defined contribution scheme. A very simplistic way to look at these schemes if you're an employee is that effectively you will pay a certain percentage of your money into a pot. Your company will either match or pay a similar percentage up to a set amount into that same pot. That pot is then taken and managed outside of the company with the hope that it also is invested and raises in line, usually with an aim of raising higher than inflation. The key distinction on this one is that your employer moves responsibility for that pension outside of the company. In effect, what this has done is shift the risk and liability of that pension from the employer to you. And this is one of the key distinctions between the defined benefit and the defined contribution scheme. Now, there are conflicting views about this and whether it's a good or a bad thing that people have more defined contribution schemes than defined benefit schemes. In my personal view, I think it's a bad thing, but I am very risk averse. I like the fact that my company would have had to guarantee my money into retirement. However, you get a certain additional level of flexibility with a defined contribution scheme that some people argue is better. Ultimately, you don't really get to choose. If you are employed through a company, they will decide what to give you, and in 99% of times, this will be a defined contribution scheme. So you just kind of have to make the best of what you've got. How I manage my pension has evolved as I've moved through different stages of my career. So for the purpose of this video, I want to clarify exactly what I did at different stages of my life. To start, when I got my first role, I was still at that time saving for my first house. In previous videos, I've mentioned no lower than 5%, and I still believe that for most people, that should be a hard and fast rule. It's definitely what I adhere to. In my first role, the employer match was actually 7%, so I took full advantage of that. And effectively, what an employer match means is that if you pay 7% into that pension pot, your employer will match 7% into that pension pot. If you don't pay 7%, so say you pay 5%, the employer will match that at 5%. This is a really, really important point to look out for, is that to maximise the money your employer is going to pay into your pension, you have to maximise your contribution up to that point. I don't want to say this is free money because it comes at a cost to you. You have to contribute extra into your pension to get that extra contribution from your employer. However, it doesn't have a cost associated because remember, this is going into your pension pot, which is going to be held and invested for you and will be sitting there waiting for you at the point of retirement. So you will get it back. It just means you might not be able to go out for that one Nando's in the week. That meant for me, it was a real no-brainer. At the time, to contribute an additional 2% into my pension would cost me £560 over the year. It meant that I was going to get an additional £560 from my company put into my pension pot, which just for putting £560 into my pension, remember this isn't additional spending or this isn't losing any money, it's just deciding to take it at a later period in my life. For the sacrifice of doing that, my pension pot was going to grow by £1,120. Moving on to this period of my life and how much I'm earning currently has massively changed how I decide to contribute to my pension. After my first role, I then moved up to an accountant role, at which point I was earning around £37,000 to £38,000 per year. At this stage, I still continue to pay my employer match at 7%, and for the majority of people, I suspect they will hold it at the employer match until they start reaching the £50,000 mark. Now this is where it gets interesting. Interesting? I mean, we're talking about pensions, but for me, this is where it does get interesting. The current higher rate tax bracket in the UK is £50,270, and that's a really, really important number. The reason pensions get interesting beyond this point is because of the potential tax savings you can have, and therefore additional free money you can put into your pension, which will be there sat waiting for you when you retire. On a £55,000 salary, the amount over the threshold is going to be £4,730 per year that will be taxed at 40%. For simplicity, I'm not going to count national insurance savings, although that is an additional saving on top. But just to keep it simple, I want to illustrate how powerful additional contributions can be on just the raw tax amount. At the 40% rate, you will be paying an additional £1,892 per year on that amount you earn over the threshold. This effectively equates to an additional £158 per month in tax, which would leave you with only £236 of that original amount to spend. So this is where the magic happens, which is if you switch that, and rather than receiving the £236 per month into your bank account, you would pay £394 per month into your pension pot. The reason this happens is because income tax is taken on net pay, which is always after deductions, of which one of those deductions is pension contributions. So in effect, by putting more into your pension, you can save on that higher rate tax. So there we go. Simple, right? The more you pay into your pension, the more tax you save, the easier it will be to retire, and you can enjoy all of this money later in life. Well, it's not quite that simple. As most of you will be aware, you do unfortunately pay tax in retirement as well. Any amount that you take over the year above the £12,570 threshold, which of course by the time you retire, hopefully will have been bumped up, maybe to £16,000, who knows, we might get lucky. But you will pay tax at 20 or 40 or even 45% depending on how big your pension pot is and how much you draw down each year. So why would you bother doing this in the first place? Well, you do get to take 25% tax-free at the point of retirement. Of course, there will be nuances, but as a broad lens, you will get to take 25% up to the value of, I think at the moment, £1 million, which if you have £1 million, that's £250,000 tax-free that you will get straight into your bank account at the point of retirement. For me, this is one of the big reasons that I try to maximise my contributions as much as I can. That healthy, tax-free lump sum, I want it to be as big as possible and make sure that I've made the most out of my pension. The second reason that I like to maximise my contributions is because of compound interest. Now, compound interest could easily be another video on its own and will definitely be one that I will cover later. However, for simplicity, for the purpose of this video, compound interest effectively means that you start with an amount of money, you invest it, you get paid interest on that. If you leave that investment and that interest in the pot, you will then earn interest on the starting money plus your interest, so on and so forth, to the point where you're earning interest on your interest on your interest on your interest. So the earlier you can build up that nest egg with the most amount of money that you can put in theory, the bigger the returns will be at the point you come to retire. Of course, this must be caveated with that investments in the stock market, in government bonds, any investments really, do carry some risk. But it is one of the most widely used investments and arguably one of the safest and one of the most tax efficient when you look at examples like this. And so paying into it really can't hurt. The third reason I try to maximise my pension contributions is because the earlier I reach the amount I need to retire, the earlier I can retire. And that's it. Quality of life is super important to me. As we said at the start of the video, everyone is getting older. It's a horrible fact to have to live with, but it is a fact. And for me, having more of my free time, being able to go part-time being able to flex my time, maybe taking some contracts, who knows? But I want to have the financial backing behind me to be able to take those risks. And the earlier I can get to that point, the better. And there we have it, a really, really simple, quick guide to pensions, how I manage my own personal one, and hopefully you can use some of this to look at your own pension and maybe increase or improve where it's invested, how it's invested, and how much you invest. I did want to briefly add that this is part 1 of my 2-part phase to become financially free as early as possible. The second part being mortgages, what property to choose, and how to overpay effectively on your mortgage so you can get that liability down as quickly as possible. But for now, all that's left to say is thank you all so much for watching. I greatly appreciate all the support you've put into my first 2 videos. It's really given me the confidence to continue to provide this content for you. If you do like it and you are finding it useful, please don't forget to give a like and a subscribe down below. It really helps get the content out there and hopefully help reach more people that would find this useful. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.